When I was young, I believed the world was black and white, beauty and ugliness, good and evil, wealth and poverty all seemed to have clear distinctions. However, as I gained more experiences, I gradually realized that many things are not absolute. They depend on perspective, the relativity of poverty and wealth. As a child, I always thought my family was poor, every time. I saw my classmates wearing branded sneakers and enjoying fast food after school while I wore ordinary cloth shoes and brought homemade meals. I couldn't help but feel envious and dissatisfied. In my mind, poverty was a misfortune, and wealth was synonymous with happiness. One day, I traveled with my parents to their hometown, a remote village. There, I saw children running barefoot on dirt roads, wearing thin clothes even in the winter. Their school desks were old and broken, and their books and stationery were patched together from whatever they could find. A young boy showed me his pencil. It was so short that he could barely hold it properly. His biggest wish was to have a brand new pencil. At that moment, I suddenly realized that poverty and wealth are not absolute. The things I envied were merely ordinary to some, while the poverty I perceived in my own life was still a luxury for others. Compared to children struggling to meet basic needs, my life was already a blessing. The relativity of beauty and ugliness. During my teenage years, I often felt insecure about my appearance. Seeing glamorous celebrities on TV and confident, popular classmates at school, I started to dislike my plain looks and simple clothes. Whenever I looked in the mirror, I felt like there was nothing special about me. Then one day, I came across a quote from a philosopher. Beauty is a perspective, not an absolute standard. Later, I met a friend whose appearance was not particularly striking, yet she had an undeniable charm. She spoke with calm confidence. Her eyes were clear and steady, and her smile carried a warmth that made people feel at ease. Over time, I found her increasingly beautiful. That was when I realized that beauty and ugliness are not just about physical features. They are reflections of one's inner essence. The relativity of fairness and unfairness. When I first entered the workforce, I worked diligently, always completing my tasks on time. However, I noticed that some colleagues were getting promotions and raises while I remained in the same position. This disparity frustrated me, making me question the fairness of the workplace. I couldn't understand why my hard work wasn't being rewarded equally. Then one day, I was assigned to a project with a recently promoted colleague. The project was complex, requiring coordination across multiple departments and handling demanding clients. As we worked together, I was surprised to discover that this colleague arrived at work earlier than I did, stayed later, and even responded to client emails in the middle of the night. He wasn't just working hard, he was taking on responsibilities that weren't immediately visible to others. At that moment, I understood that fairness is not just about surface-level effort. It requires seeing the full picture. What I once perceived as unfairness was actually my lack of awareness of the greater responsibilities and sacrifices involved. The relativity of good and evil. As a child, I believed in clear-cut justice. Good people should be rewarded, and bad people should be punished. But as I grew older, I realized that reality is far more complex. Some people appear kind on the surface, but are filled with hidden malice, while others seem cold and distant, yet carry a heart of gold. We often judge good and evil based on our own standards without considering the deeper stories behind people's actions. There was once a neighbor in my village who was notorious for his unfriendly demeanor. He rarely spoke to anyone and seemed harsh and unapproachable. Most villagers disliked him, seeing him as bitter and mean-spirited. One day, however, I accidentally learned his story. He had once used his life savings to help impoverished children, but he was deceived and lost everything. This betrayal shattered his trust in the world, leading him to shut himself off from others. At that moment, I began to question, can good and evil truly be defined by simple standards? Sometimes what we perceive as evil is merely the result of hidden wounds, and true goodness does not always wear a friendly face. Life's realization. Through life's journey, I have come to understand that the world is not as black and white as I once believed. Beauty and ugliness, wealth and poverty, fairness and unfairness, good and evil, all of these are relative concepts, shaped by our perspectives and experiences. Instead of constantly comparing ourselves to others, we should learn to observe, understand, and appreciate the world from different angles. When we shift our perspective, many things that once troubled us will suddenly become clear.